All right. So, our second teaching of the day is our Shoftim or Judges teaching. Will be in chapter 14. I ask everyone, if you would, to turn there, please. It says, Shimshon went down to Timnah. And in Timnah he saw a woman who was one of the Philistines. Now, almost every time I've ever heard this taught on, okay, one of two things happen. Either we're taught that Shimshon was in a place that he should not have been, or he is immediately chastised because he associated with a woman who, or was interested in a woman who was not Israeli. Okay? Now, I want to call out here two issues with these teachings. Number one, why would Timnah be someplace that he is not supposed to be? Timnah is named for a son of Abba Abraham. Okay, now we talked about that last week in the Bashiri teaching. That name came up, and we talked about he was a son, a descendant of Esau, okay, and was of the land of Edom, but that is part of the land that was promised to B'nai Abraham. Okay, so it's actually a part of the land of promise. It's actually a part of what was handed down to Yitzhak, and it's actually a part of what in eternity will belong to Yisrael. Okay, so why was he not supposed to be there? This is a shoft of Yisraelim. Okay, this is a judge of the people, consecrated as such from the womb, went down to a city, to a place. I don't know how big it was. I don't know how big it was at that time. Some scholars probably have researched that. But went down to a place that technically was supposed to be sitting under his judgment. So where the teachers come from who say this is a place he should not have been, and I've heard it said, and I love the man to death who said this, he said, this is a lesson in you know where you ought not go. This wasn't a place that he ought not go. Does everybody follow that? This is a place that technically he was supposed to go to present Torah. The second part, he had an interest in a woman who was not of Yisrael. Okay. Now I get it. You're going to take a wife. That's not be taking a wife who's not a like believer. It's going to complicate your marriage. She's probably going to draw you into sin, and your children are going to grow up confused. I agree with all of that. Okay, but let's talk about some of the women in Scripture who were not Batim Yisrael. They were not the daughters of Yaakov. Okay, biologically. Has anyone heard of a woman named Rahab? Okay, talk about Rahab. She had a grandson, I believe, who was Boaz. And Boaz met a woman, because Rahab was Canaanite. She's of the Canaanim. Okay. But Boaz met a woman we call Ruth. And Ruth was a Moabim. Neither one of them was a daughter of Yisrael. And yet they are two of the most upstanding, righteous women in all of Scripture. You see, Rahab could not cease to be Canaanim. And Ruth could not cease to be Moabim. They could not become Yisraelim, but you know what they could become? They could become daughters of Sarai. They could become Batim Sarai by faith. And that is exactly what they did. And that is why they became the grandmothers and however many greats they were, grandmothers of a man named David, who slew a giant and became a king. And they became the umpteenth, however many more it was. I think it was like, I want to say it was another 14 generations, but I probably have my math wrong there. To a man named Yeshua, who is the King of Kings. He is the Melachim of all of Scripture. And so when these teachers say that Shimshon should not have been in Timnah, should not have had any interest in a woman who was not Yisraelim, I have to call them out on that. The problem here isn't that she wasn't Yisraelim. The problem here was that she was not Batai Abraham or Batai Sarai. Does everyone follow me there? Because she could have been Philistine all day long, and if she had given her heart to the Elohim of Abraham, then this would have been a good thing and not a bad thing. He came up and told his father and mother, I saw a woman in Timnah, one of the Philistine. Now get her for me to be my wife. Now I've heard this taught as, you see this? This man was both the spiritual and political leader and military leader also of all of Israel. And he still went to his mother and father for their blessing on who he would marry. That's not what's happening here. You see, he's going through the right steps. He sees this woman. He wants to marry her. He goes to his parents. But he doesn't say, what do you think about this woman as a match for me? He says, I saw this woman I like. Go get her for me. You see, he had kind of let his position as Shuf kind of go to his head. And even though he was going through the motions of speaking to his father and mother about this courtship or this possible marriage that he wanted to set up, he wasn't asking them their blessing. He wasn't asking them for direction and advice. He was telling them what to do. Okay? I was a senior minister over the ministry where my grandfather was a quote unquote lesser elder, if you want to put it that way. I was the elder of elders, and this man who had been teaching scripture since before my mother was born sat quote unquote in a lower seat of authority spiritually in that congregation. I'm not going to say that I never fell into Shimshon's trap. I'm not going to say that I never got a little arrogant and thought, hey, I'm in charge here. But do you know what I did? I made took every opportunity possible. Even when that ministry sent me out and Lisa and I went out and we did missions and ran a homeless shelter on the other end of the state, I would call my grandfather every day. As his health got worse, it eventually got to where it was like every week. But at first it was like every day pretty much. I would call him and I would say, Grandpa, I think I know what I need to do here, but what do you think? Okay? I'm not going to say I always did it. There were times when I misstepped, and when I misstepped, it was usually because I didn't get the sound advice of a literal elder. I was an elder in position. He was elder in age by many years, elder in experience, and elder in knowledge of the word. And you know what? He's been gone for quite a few years now. 12, I believe. And I think it's more than that. 11, less than that. Okay, so my son thinks it's 11 years, something like that. I don't think there's been a day that has gone by that I haven't wished I could pick up the phone and say, Grandpa, I think I know what I need to do here. What do you think? I know there hasn't been a decision about the ministry that I haven't wished I could sit down with him and open up the Word and have him show me where I might be off track. It is so easy. Just like I talked in the earlier session in Bashirin about how we can't let ourselves get caught up in, well, why does that person get that blessing? Why shouldn't I get that blessing? Okay, and we can't let ourselves be jealous. We also can't let ourselves be arrogant. Okay, we cannot allow ourselves to fall into the trap of, look what he has blessed me with, and he didn't give it to that person. So obviously, I'm the one who's in good with Elohim. So what I'm doing is right. His father and mother replied, isn't there any woman from the daughters of your kinsmen or among all my people? Must you go to the uncircumcised Philistine to find a wife? Shimshon said to his father, get her for me. I like her. See where this is going? Earlier, where I talked about the perfect will and the permissive will of Abba. Okay, and we kind of see something like that going on here. The perfect will of Shimshon's father was that he would find a wife from among the daughters of Yaakov. Okay, his permissive will was, okay, son, if that's really what you want, but there's going to be consequences. Okay, and that's really kind of a picture for us, not just of how we choose our wives, young men who don't have wives yet, listen up. Okay, it's not just a picture of how we should look at potential mates, you who don't have a husband yet. It's a picture of how we should make every decision in our lives. Because just as as Shimshon's father had a perfect and permissive will, Abba Elohim has a perfect and permissive will for every decision we could ever make. And in the end, he's always going to work it out to what he wanted us to have, how he wanted things to be in the end. But if we complicate it, we hurt ourselves in the process, and it's going to take us a lot longer to get to the blessing that he has for us. His father and mother didn't know that all this came from Yehovah, who was seeking grounds for a quarrel with the Philistine. At that time, the Philistines were ruling Israel. Now, some people read that, and I can see where they get it, and they say, see, it was always Yehovah's intent for Shimshon to rebel against his father and mother and take this other woman as his wife. I don't see it that way. And I could be wrong, but I read this as that permissive will thing. Okay? It says, yes, it says Yehovah wanted a reason, basically, he was seeking grounds for a quarrel with the Philistine. You know what? Yehovah could have used anything as a grounds for a quarrel. If we're really honest about it, he didn't even need a grounds for a quarrel. We, Yitzraelim, had rebelled against him. He had turned us over to the Philistine as a punishment. And when he decided it was time for us to take back the land, he could have just wiped out the Philistine, and we wouldn't have had to do anything. We didn't even have to be a part of it. He chose to let us be part of his glory. So the argument that it was always his intention for Shimshon to rebel against his parents holds no water. Shimshon went down with his father and mother to Timnah. When they came to the vineyards of Timnah, a young lion roared at him. The spirit of Yehovah came powerfully upon Shimshon, and barehanded he tore the lion in pieces as easily as if it had been a young goat. But he didn't tell his father or mother what he had done. Then he went down and talked with the woman and found he still liked her. We read that. We always hear about, Shimshon killed the lion. He ripped the lion with his bare hands. They make it out like this was like the simplest thing. I believe this was the first time that the spirit of Yehovah actually came upon him. Okay, I don't believe that he had grown to the strength that he was going to be when his great feats later. You notice it says that he rented it as easily as if it was a young goat. I used to raise goats, more sheep than goats, but I raised a few goats. Okay, if that kid, that young goat, is alive, and you try to rent it in half, it's going to fight, it's going to buck, it's going to kick. Okay, and could a grown man pull one apart alive? Yeah, it can. You can dislocate the joints and break the neck, and it's doable, but it's not going to be simple. Okay, and so I think there's something in the context there that kind of points out that when he killed this lion, it was comparable to you or I, young men, going out and killing a goat. There was still a labor to it. Okay, as we go through his story, we're going to see that he becomes stronger and stronger, and it's going to have to do in part with obedience. But we'll get into that. Okay, but there's a message there that just because we're doing right, which he had actually rebelled against his parents, but he was still doing the things that the angel had told his parents he had to do if he was going to be Shav. Okay, be used as Elohim planned to use him. But he was doing these things in obedience, and we're going to see him grow in his strength as a result. A while later, as he was returning to claim his bride. So he's been to Timnah, he's been home, and now he's returning to claim his bride. It says, he turned aside to look at the carcass of the lion and saw that there was now a swarm of bees in the body of the lion and honey. He scraped the honey out into his hands and went on, eating as he went. And when he came to his father and mother, he gave them some, and they ate too. But he didn't tell them that he had scraped the honey out of the body of the lion. Now I want you to think about something. This man who did this feat that you and I could not do, okay, he comes back past the place where he did it, and it's not enough for him to just walk past it. He has to go back and look upon what he did. Okay, I'm not saying that's always bad. We need to go back and review what Elohim has done in our lives. But he comes up to it and he gets close enough. He sees the bees in it and he sees the honey. And he takes it and he eats it. He ends up sharing it with his parents. And I think there's a message there about when we return to and reflect upon the things that Elohim does in our lives, the things he blesses us with. So there's a sweetness there. When we come into situations which may not seem as blessed, recently my daughter became very ill. We had to have a life flight into another state to save her life. And there were moments while she was in the hospital, and since she's been in recovery, there have been moments when I've asked, where is the blessing? Okay, and one of the things that has helped me through that and helped me to have hope and get through those struggles as we've struggled with our health, we've struggled with finances, we've struggled with different things related to that. One of the things that has helped me is to do this, to go back to the things that Elohim has done in my life that were clearly blessings, and to be reminded of the sweetness therein. Okay? Because if he did those things for me once before, he will do them for me again. Okay? If he has blessed me, it may not be the same blessing, but if he has blessed me before, he will bless me again. My job is to be obedient, not to question why. His father went down to the woman, and there Shimshon gave a banquet. That is what the young men used to do. Okay, so he's given a wedding banquet. When the Philistine saw him, they provided 30 companions to be with him. Now, this seems odd to people in today's culture. It seems odd to me, and I used to read this and think how strange this is, and why did he not suspect that something was afoot? He goes into this land where he doesn't really know anybody except the woman he's getting ready to marry. But the people of the land send 30 young men to surround him and celebrate with him, and he doesn't even know them. We find out later that one was designated to be the best man and be with him all the time. Now, if that happened to me, I want to believe I'd be like, this ain't kosher. Okay? My Southern Indiana Jewishness would say, this ain't kosher. That's how I would say it. But my understanding now, having researched it, having read from different scholars, is that it was almost considered bad, like being a bad host in a situation like this. If someone came from another land and threw a banquet, if you didn't provide guests, he's hosting the banquet, but you're hosting him. And if you don't send somebody to celebrate with him, that it would be like uncouth. I don't know, but they used it to their advantage. Says Shimshon said to them, "Let me present you with a riddle. If you can solve it within the 7 days of the banquet and tell me the solution, I will give you 30 linen shirts and 30 changes of good clothes. But if you can't solve it, you give me 30 linen shirts and 30 changes of good clothes." They answered, "Tell us the riddle. We want to hear it." So he said to them, "Out of the eater came food, out of the strong came sweetness." Now you have to think, because a lot of people look at this and they say, he's gambling. Yeah, he was. I'm not trying to justify that. I think the greater lesson here, although we could talk all day about the poor stewardship that goes into gambling, okay? I am not trying to say he was right to do that. What I think is really more important here, though, is that we're learning a lesson about who to trust. Okay? Three days passed, and they couldn't solve the riddle. Why? Because he was the only person who ever saw the lion. Okay? He has this secret of what Elohim did through him. On the seventh day, they said to Shimshon's wife, "Coax your husband into telling us the solution of the riddle. Otherwise, we'll burn down your father's house and you with it. You two called us here to turn us into paupers, didn't you?" Shimshon's wife went to him in tears and said, "You don't love me. You hate me. You told a riddle to my fellow countrymen and you haven't told me the answer." Now, I've heard it said that this woman was crying crocodile tears. Okay? And I've heard it said that this woman never had any intention to be faithful to Shimshon. I don't believe either of those things are true. I believe these tears were born out of the fear that these men were going to kill her while burning down her father's house. And what young woman wouldn't cry in that fear? I don't think we can judge her for that. What I think we can judge is the fact that Shimshon barely knew this woman. Wanted to marry her. From what the text says, and he didn't read like he'd even had a conversation with her, and went and told his father and mother, "Go get her for my bride." This was purely a physical attraction. I think there's a message in that too, because Proverbs 31 says the beauty is fleeting and passing. You should seek out a woman who loves and serves Yehovah. Shimshon wasn't doing that. Because if this woman loved Yehovah, she would have handled this differently. She would have gone to her future husband and she would have said, "My kinsmen, my biological relatives over here have threatened to kill me by putting me in my father's house and setting fire to it if I don't get you to tell them the solution to this riddle." And then he, being Shimshon, probably would have gone out and slain them. Or his other option is he could have been like, "You know what, I'll just give you 30 changes of clothes. Leave my wife alone." Okay? But she didn't do that. She resorted to the thinking of the flesh. She wept before him, probably legitimate tears because she was scared for her life, but she didn't bother to tell him what was going on. He said to her, "Look, I haven't even told it to my father and mother. Should I tell you?" But she had been crying throughout the 7 days of the banquet. So on the seventh day, because she had kept pressing him, he told her the solution, and she passed it on to her people. Then before sundown on the seventh day, the men of the city came to him. "What is sweeter than honey? And what is stronger than a lion?" Oh, now Shimshon knows that he's been betrayed. He knows that his bride has sold him out. Shimshon answered, "If you hadn't plowed with my young cow, you wouldn't have solved my riddle now." And people say, why would he call his bride a cow? His bride had just sold him out and betrayed him. Also, at this point, she's not his wife. People say, what? But they were having the celebration dinner, the feast. Yeah. In traditional Middle Eastern culture, especially in the traditional Hebrew culture, today we have the wedding and then the wedding reception. No. In the old days, you had the feast. And then toward the end of the feast, the couple would go off and consummate the marriage. The celebration happened first. Okay, so he's gone through 7 days of celebrating the fact he's about to marry this woman. And she sells him out. And now he delivers her this insult. Basically saying if she can be led around and manipulated by these other men, then he doesn't even want her for his wife. Then the spirit of Yehovah came over him powerfully. He went down to Ashkelon, killed 30 of their men, took their good clothes, and gave them to the men who had, quote-unquote, solved the riddle. The Complete Jewish Study Bible puts solved in quotes. Obviously, in the Hebrew, the quotes aren't there, but I get what they're saying. I think that's a good translation. It says, he was boiling with rage, so he went straight up to his father's house, and his wife, would have been his wife, the Hebrew there actually says the woman, was given to the companion who had been best man at the wedding. So we can see that neither she nor her father really had any desire for her to be his wife. You know, there's a lot in today's society, although we don't still do the arranged marriages. I think there are a lot of individuals who go into marriage not really intending to be that person's wife or husband. Okay, we have a lot of people who go. I've actually know a woman who got married, had some children, and just was very, very unhappy in her marriage. And I asked her, I said, you know, beforehand, what did you see in him that made you want to marry him? Because although I'm adamantly in favor of you know, preserving this marriage, I believe that's what Elohim wants. I just don't see that, you know, that connection. And she literally told me, she said, well, I'd never been married before, and he asked me, so I thought, why not? And I think there's a lot of that in today's culture because we live in a what they call the throwaway society. You go to a restaurant, you can buy your food, you throw away the wrapper. You know what I'm saying? Your TV isn't the newest one, so you buy a new TV, throw out the old one. Okay, you always want the next, the newest, the best, and so you throw out the old. Now, I get it. We're Jewish. Polygyny is a thing. You know, half the tribes wouldn't exist if Yaakov hadn't had more than one wife. I'm you know I'm not going into and saying, you know, take a position on that. I'm saying even according to Torah, if a man has a wife and he takes a second wife, he's not to put away the other wife unless she's been, you know, sexually unfaithful to him. Okay, and that's how sacred marriage is in the eyes of our Creator. Now, some people will say, well, we don't do that anymore, and yada, yada. And I get that. I understand. I'm not trying to start an argument on that. I'm saying Torah sets a standard here for marriage that our society today does not understand or respect. And that's why when I caution people, when you're having marital issues, don't take counsel from someone who doesn't believe in the sanctity of marriage. Okay, don't go to your unbelieving friend and say, do you think I should get a divorce? Okay, don't go to your person that you know who's been divorced 5 times and say, I'm having trouble with my spouse. Okay, go to someone who, number one, you know, believes in the sanctity and the blessedness of marriage, and go to someone who spent a lot of years married. Okay, go to someone and say, okay, you've made it work for 50 years. How'd you do it? Because if you go to the person who has been divorced 4 or 5 times, they're not going to tell you to turn to the scripture and look at what marriage is and pray with your partner, your spouse, and they're not going to tell you those things. They're going to give you the phone number of a good divorce lawyer. Okay? And unfortunately, that's the society we live in. The society we live in today is no different than the Philistines who gave the bride to the next man in line. Do we have a midrash?